Millionaire saves black woman from drunk husband, not knowing he would fall in love with her. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The neon sign of Pete's Bar and Grill flickered in the evening darkness as Alexander Grant loosened his silk tie. Another 14-hour day at Grant Enterprises had left him drained. At 42, he had everything money could buy, but tonight the emptiness of his penthouse apartment felt suffocating. That's why he'd stopped at this small neighborhood bar instead of heading straight home. "The usual, Mr. Grant?" Pete, the owner, asked as Alexander took his regular seat at the end of the bar. "Just Alex here, Pete. And yes, scotch on the rocks." The bar was quiet for a Thursday night, with only a handful of regulars scattered around. That's why the raised voices from a corner booth immediately caught his attention. A man was berating a woman, his words slurred but cruel. "You think you're something special with that music of yours? You're nothing without me, Serena, nothing." Alexander watched as the woman, Serena, kept her eyes down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Even from across the room, he could see they were trembling. "Marcus, please," she whispered. "You're drunk, let's just go home." "Don't tell me what to do." Marcus grabbed her wrist roughly. "You've been acting different lately, thinking you're better than me because you got that little gig at the coffee shop." Alexander set his glass down, every muscle in his body tensing. He'd seen enough domestic violence cases through his company's charitable foundation to recognize the signs. This wasn't just a drunk man being belligerent. This was an abuser asserting control. "I said let's go." Marcus yanked Serena's arm, causing her to stumble as he pulled her from the booth. That's when Alexander saw the bruises peeking out from under her sleeve. His blood ran cold. "Hey," Pete called out. "Take it easy there, buddy." Marcus spun around, still gripping Serena's arm. "Mind your own business, old man. The lady clearly doesn't want to go with you," Alexander said, standing up. His voice was calm but carried the authority of someone used to being listened to. Marcus sneered. "And who do you think you are? This is between me and my wife." "Let her go," Alexander said, taking a step closer. "Now." "Marcus, please," Serena pleaded. "You're hurting me." Instead of releasing her, Marcus raised his hand. But before he could strike, Alexander moved with surprising speed. He caught Marcus's wrist mid-swing and twisted, forcing the younger man to let go of Serena. "Pete, call the police," Alexander ordered, keeping himself between Marcus and Serena. "Ah, you don't know who you're messing with," Marcus spat, but his bravado wavered when he tried to push past Alexander and couldn't. "Actually, I do," Alexander replied. "You're a man who beats his wife to feel powerful, but that ends tonight." Serena had pressed herself against the wall, her dark eyes wide with fear, not just of Marcus, but of what might happen next. She'd tried to leave before, but Marcus had always found her, and things had gotten worse. "Ma'am," Alexander said softly, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head slightly, though her wrist was red where Marcus had grabbed her. "The police are on their way," Pete announced. Marcus's face turned ugly. "You'll regret this, Serena, both of you will." "Add that threat to the police report," Alexander said calmly. "I'm sure they'll be interested." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. The police arrived, took statements, and arrested Marcus for assault and making threats. Alexander noticed how Serena seemed to shrink into herself as she spoke to the female officer, her voice barely above a whisper. When they were finally alone, Alexander approached her carefully. "I have a car waiting outside. I can take you somewhere safe, a friend's house, a hotel, wherever you want to go." Serena wrapped her arms around herself. I don't have anywhere to go. We moved here 6 months ago for Marcus's job. I don't know anyone." "Then let me help. I own a building downtown with secure apartments. You can stay in one until you figure out your next steps." She looked at him suspiciously. "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me." "Because everyone deserves to feel safe," he said simply. "No strings attached. You'll have your own space, and there's 24-hour security." Serena glanced toward the door, as if expecting Marcus to burst back in at any moment. "He'll find me, he always does." "Not this time," Alexander promised. "I have resources, connections. We can get you a restraining order first thing tomorrow." "We?" Her voice held a hint of challenge despite her fear. "I'm not looking for a savior, Mr. Grant. Alexander Grant, and I'm not trying to save you. I'm just offering you a safe place to land while you save yourself." Something in his words must have reached her, because she took a shaky breath and nodded. "One night. Just until I can figure something out." As Alexander led her to his waiting car, neither of them realized that this night would change both their lives forever. For Serena, It was the first step toward freedom from years of abuse. For Alexander, it was the moment he began to see that all his wealth and success meant nothing without someone to share it with. But the road ahead would be far from smooth. Marcus's threats weren't empty words, and Serena's path to healing would test them both in ways they never expected. The story that began in Pete's bar was just the first chapter in a journey that would teach them both about trust, redemption, and the kind of love that transforms lives. Pete watched them leave from behind his bar, shaking his head. In 30 years of running this place, he'd seen all kinds of stories unfold, but something told him this one was going to be different. Looking at the broken glass from Marcus's tantrum, he smiled slightly. Sometimes the worst nights brought the best beginnings. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury apartment, but Serena Moore sat huddled on the pristine white couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's angry face, heard his threats echoing in her head. A gentle knock at the door made her jump. "Serena, it's Alexander. I brought some breakfast and some clothes. My assistant helped pick them out." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. Part of her wanted to pretend she wasn't here, to hide from this stranger's kindness, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. "Come in," she called softly. Alexander entered carrying several shopping bags and a tray of coffee and pastries. He looked different in the morning light, less intimidating in casual clothes, though still obviously wealthy. Everything about him screamed money, from his designer watch to his perfectly styled hair. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, setting everything down on the coffee table, "but there's a little bit of everything. You didn't have to do this." Serena's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know." He kept his distance, aware of how uncomfortable she was. "But I wanted to. There's also a phone in one of the bags. Prepaid, untraceable. Marcus won't be able to track it." At the mention of her husband's name, Serena flinched. "He'll be out of jail by now." "Yes, but he can't come near this building. I've already alerted security, and we're meeting with my lawyer at 10 to file for a restraining order." "Your lawyer?" Serena stood up suddenly, anger flashing in her eyes. "I told you I don't need you to fix everything. I'm not some charity case." Alexander remained calm. "You're right. You're not a charity case. You're a woman who deserves proper legal protection, and I happen to have access to the best lawyers in the city. Take advantage of that. Not for me, but for yourself." His words hit home, and Serena sank back onto the couch. "I'm sorry. I'm not used to people helping without wanting something in return. Marcus really did a number on you, didn't he?" Tears welled up in Serena's eyes. "It wasn't always bad. When we first met, he was different, sweet, supportive. He used to come to all my performances." "You're a performer?" "I was. Classical piano mainly, but I wrote my own music too. I had a scholarship to Juilliard." She trailed off, lost in memories. "What happened?" "Marcus lost his job. He was so depressed, drinking all the time. I dropped out to support him, took whatever jobs I could find. He promised things would get better once he got back on his feet, but..." She wiped her eyes. "Instead, he got controlling, jealous. Said my music was a waste of time, that I was just trying to make him feel bad about himself." Alexander's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. "When was the last time you played?" 2 years ago, the night he broke my hand." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken horror. Alexander wanted to say something, anything to ease her pain. But what could he possibly say to make that better? Before he could try, his phone buzzed. "That's probably Gloria, my lawyer. Are you ready to go?" Serena looked down at her rumpled clothes. "I can't go out like this." "That's what the shopping bags are for. Take your time. We can reschedule if you're not up to it." "No," she said firmly. "No more hiding. No more letting him control my life." Alexander smiled. "That's the spirit. I'll wait in the lobby whenever you're ready." As he turned to leave, Serena called out, "Alexander, thank you. Not just for the things, but for not treating me like I'm broken." "You're not broken, Serena. Bent maybe, but not broken." After he left, Serena opened the shopping bags. The clothes were simple but elegant. Jeans, sweaters, comfortable shoes. Nothing flashy or revealing. He'd been thoughtful even in this. As she changed, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at her looked tired, scared, but there was something else in her eyes now. A spark of hope, maybe, or determination. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Alexander was on the phone with his head of security. "I want her monitored 24/7, but discreetly. If Marcus shows up anywhere near here, we'll handle it, sir," the security chief assured him. But there's something else you should know. We ran a background check on Marcus Moore. He's got quite a record, assault charges, restraining orders from 2 previous relationships. And he's been making calls from jail, one to a private investigator known for finding people who don't want to be found. Alexander's jaw tightened. Increase security on all entrances, and get me everything you can on this PI. If Marcus thinks he can intimidate her into going back to him, he's in for a surprise. Sir, your mother called again. She's asking questions about why you missed the foundation dinner last night. Tell her I was handling an urgent situation. She's planning to stop by the office today. Alexander sighed. Elizabeth Grant was not a woman easily put off, and she had very specific ideas about how her son should live his life. Finding out he'd taken in an abused woman with nothing to her name, it wouldn't go over well. But watching Serena step off the elevator, dressed simply but holding her head high, Alexander knew he didn't care what his mother thought. There was something about this woman that called to him, not just her beauty or her obvious strength, but a depth of spirit that all her husband's cruelty hadn't managed to crush. "Ready?" he asked. Serena nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. "Ready." As they walked to his car, neither noticed the man across the street, pretending to read a newspaper while taking photos with his phone. Marcus's PI worked fast, and his client would be very interested to know where his wife was staying and with whom. The pieces were in motion now, and the safe harbor Alexander had offered Serena was about to be tested by storms neither of them saw coming. Elizabeth Grant's heels clicked sharply against the marble floors of Grant Enterprises as she made her way to her son's office. At 65, she still commanded attention, her silver hair perfectly styled and her designer suit immaculate. The secretary didn't even try to stop her as she pushed open Alexander's office doors. "Mother," Alexander said without looking up from his computer, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Don't take that tone with me, Alexander. You missed the foundation dinner last night. The Whitmores were expecting you to discuss their daughter Charlotte's charity project." "You mean they were expecting me to court their daughter?" he replied, finally meeting his mother's stern gaze. "I'm not interested." Elizabeth settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "You're 42 years old, Alexander. It's time you settled down with someone appropriate. Charlotte comes from an excellent family. She's on the board of 3 major charities. And she's as shallow as a puddle," Alexander cut in. "Besides, I was handling something important last night." "Oh? More important than our family's social obligations?" Just then, Alexander's phone buzzed. It was a text from Gloria, his lawyer. "Restraining order granted, but Marcus's lawyer is fighting hard. He's claiming temporary insanity due to alcohol. Says he wants to reconcile." Alexander's expression darkened. Elizabeth noticed immediately. "What is it? What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing that concerns you, Mother." But Elizabeth Grant hadn't raised 3 children without developing a 6th sense for secrets. "Harrison," she called to Alexander's secretary. "What exactly was my son doing last night?" Harrison looked uncomfortable. I'm not at liberty to discuss." "He helped a woman escape from her abusive husband," a new voice said from the doorway. Serena stood there, still in the clothes Alexander had bought her, her head held high despite her obvious nervousness. "Your son probably saved my life." Elizabeth's face went completely blank, her society mask firmly in place. "And you are?" "Serena Moore, Mrs. Grant." "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Alexander, Mr. Grant, has a meeting with the security team about the restraining order." Elizabeth turned back to her son. "Alexander, a word in private? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Serena." "Very well." Elizabeth's voice could have frozen fire. "Have you lost your mind, taking in some random woman off the street? Do you have any idea what this could do to our family's reputation?" "Mother," Alexander warned. "No, let me finish. We've worked too hard to build this family's name to have it destroyed by some gold digger with a sob story." "Mrs. Grant," Serena interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand your concern, but I'm not after your son's money. Once I get back on my feet, I'll be out of his life." Something in Serena's words made Alexander's chest tighten. He stood up. "Actually, that's not what I want." Both women stared at him. "Alexander," his mother began, but he held up his hand. "No, Mother. I'm done letting you orchestrate my life. Serena is staying in one of my buildings because she needs help, yes, but also because I want her there. Because for the first time in years, I've met someone real, someone who sees me as more than just the Grant fortune." Elizabeth's face flushed with anger. "You can't be serious. This woman is married to an abuser," Alexander shot back, "and we're getting her out of that marriage." "We?" Elizabeth laughed coldly. Listen to yourself. You've known her for what, a day? And already you're talking about we. Mrs. Grant is right, Serena said softly. This is crazy. I should go. No. Alexander moved to stand between Serena and the door. You're not running away because my mother disapproves. And you, he turned to Elizabeth, can either accept that I'm finally making my own choices, or you can leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Elizabeth stood slowly, straightening her jacket. You'll regret this, she said quietly. When she takes you for everything you're worth, remember I warned you. She walked to the door, then paused. The board meeting is at 3. Try not to miss it while playing hero to your friend. After she left, Serena sank into a chair. I'm so sorry. I never meant to cause problems with your family. Alexander knelt in front of her. Hey, look at me. My mother has been trying to control my life since I was born. It's time someone stood up to her. But she's right about one thing, you barely know me. I know enough. He took her hands in his. I know you're strong, even though you don't believe it yet. I know you're talented and passionate about music, even though Marcus tried to steal that from you. And I know that when you smile, really smile like you did this morning when we won the restraining order, it lights up the whole room. Tears spilled down Serena's cheeks. Alexander, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just don't leave because my mother scared you. Don't let her do to you what Marcus did. Make you feel like you don't deserve good things in your life. Before Serena could respond, Harrison burst in. Mr. Grant, there's a situation in the lobby. Mr. Moore is here demanding to see his wife. Alexander stood, his face hardening. Call security and get Gloria back here. Already done, sir, but he's not alone. He's got reporters with him. What? He's telling them how you've stolen his wife, how he's a changed man who just wants to reconcile with the woman he loves. The vultures are eating it up. Serena started trembling. He's trying to force me out. If there's enough publicity, he can't touch you, Alexander assured her. The restraining order won't stop him from destroying your reputation, she finished. Your mother was right. I'm nothing but trouble. You're wrong, Alexander said firmly. And I'm going to prove it. Harrison, get me the video footage from Pete's bar last night. And call Pete, see if he'll go on record about what he witnessed. It's time Marcus learned what real power looks like. As Harrison hurried out, Alexander turned back to Serena. Do you trust me? She looked into his eyes, seeing not pity or obligation, but something deeper, something that made her heart race. Yes, she whispered. God help me, but I do. Then let me handle this. Marcus wants to play dirty? Fine, but he's about to learn he picked the wrong man to challenge. Downstairs, Marcus continued his performance for the cameras, crying crocodile tears about his beloved wife and the billionaire who'd taken her from him. But his smug smile faded when he saw Alexander Grant walking toward him, a tablet in his hand and steel in his eyes. The battle for Serena's freedom and heart was about to go public. The afternoon news played on every TV in Grant Enterprises lobby. Marcus Moore's tearful face filled the screens as reporters thrust microphones toward him. I just want my wife back, he sobbed. I've made mistakes, yes, but I'm getting help. Serena is my whole world, and this rich guy just swoops in and tears our marriage apart. Alexander stood at the back of the lobby, tablet in hand, watching the performance with cold anger. Beside him, Gloria, his lawyer, shook her head. He's good, she admitted, playing the reformed husband card, making you look like the wealthy homewrecker. The public loves this kind of story. Show them the video, Serena said quietly. She'd been silent until now, watching her husband's act with a mixture of fear and disgust. Alexander touched her arm gently. Are you sure? Once this goes public, there's no taking it back. Everyone will know that I'm a victim. Her voice strengthened. I'm tired of being ashamed. Show them who Marcus really is. Alexander nodded to Gloria, who stepped forward to address the media circus. Ladies and gentlemen, she called out, before you continue painting Mr. Moore as a victim, perhaps you'd like to see what really happened the night Mr. Grant supposedly stole Mrs. Moore. The security footage from Pete's bar played on the lobby screens. The black and white video was crystal clear. Marcus grabbing Serena, raising his hand to strike her, Alexander's intervention. Then Pete appeared next to Gloria, holding up Serena's medical records from previous accidents. This wasn't the first time, Pete said gruffly, but thanks to Mr. Grant, it was the last. The reporter's attention shifted instantly. Cameras swung away from Marcus, whose face had turned from tearful to murderous. You think this changes anything? He snarled at Serena. You're still my wife, and when I get you alone, that's enough. Alexander's voice boomed through the lobby. "Security, escort Mr. Moore out. He's violating the restraining order." As security guards moved toward Marcus, he pointed at Alexander. "You rich boys think you can take whatever you want, but she'll never love you. She's trash, just like me. That's why we belong together." The guards dragged Marcus out, his threats echoing off the marble walls. Serena swayed slightly, and Alexander steadied her. "Let's get you upstairs," he said softly. In his office, Serena collapsed onto the couch, shaking. "He's right, you know, I am trash. Look at me, hiding in your fancy building, wearing clothes you bought me." "Stop." Alexander knelt in front of her. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a survivor. A woman who had the courage to walk away from abuse, to start over with nothing." "I didn't walk away," she whispered. "You rescued me." "No, I just opened a door. You chose to walk through it." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should see." He went to his desk and pulled out a folder. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 8 years ago, a review of a piano recital at Juilliard. Serena Moore's performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 brought the audience to tears, he read. Her original composition, Freedom's Dance, reveals a talent that will surely reshape the classical music landscape. Serena stared at him. "How did you—" "I had my people do some research. The woman in this review? That's who you really are, not Marcus's victim, not my mother's worst nightmare. You're an artist, Serena, a brilliant one. I haven't touched a piano in 2 years, she said, but her fingers twitched as if remembering. Alexander stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." He led her through a hidden door in his office into a small room. There, gleaming in the afternoon light, stood a beautiful grand piano. "Sometimes I come here to think," he explained, "but I've never learned to play. It just felt right to have it here." Serena approached the piano slowly, running her fingers along its smooth surface. "I can't." "You can. The door locks from the inside. No one will disturb you. Stay as long as you like." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Alexander, will you stay? Just for a little while?" He sat in a chair near the window as Serena settled onto the piano bench. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Then softly at first she began to play. The melody was hesitant, like a bird testing broken wings. But as her confidence grew, so did the music. Joy and pain, fear and hope. Every emotion she'd buried during her years with Marcus poured out through her fingers. Alexander watched, mesmerized. In that moment, he realized he was falling in love with her. Not because she needed his help, not because she was beautiful, but because her spirit, like her music, was unbreakable. When the last note faded, Serena was crying. But these weren't tears of fear or shame. They were tears of release. "That was beautiful," Alexander said softly. "It's the piece I was working on before." She wiped her eyes. "I never finished it." "You will." He moved to sit beside her on the bench. "When you're ready." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them crackled with possibility. But then Serena looked away. "I'm still married," she reminded him, "and after today's media circus, getting a divorce won't be easy. We'll handle it together," he promised, one day at a time. Outside the sanctuary of the piano room, their problems waited. Marcus's threats, Elizabeth's disapproval, the media's hunger for scandal. But in that moment, with music still echoing in their hearts, none of it seemed insurmountable. What they didn't know was that Marcus had already set his next plan in motion. In a dingy bar across town, he met with a man who specialized in digging up dirt, and if no dirt existed, creating it. "I want everything you can find on Alexander Grant," Marcus said, sliding an envelope full of cash across the table. "Everyone has secrets. Find his." The investigator picked up the envelope, smiling coldly. "Oh, Mr. Grant has secrets, all right, and wait till you hear about his father's death." Elizabeth Grant sat alone in her study, staring at an old photograph of her late husband, Richard. The evening news still played in the background, showing clips of Marcus Moore's public meltdown and the damaging security footage that exposed his true nature. Her cell phone rang, a number she hadn't seen in years. "Detective Morrison," she answered, her voice tight. "I assume this isn't a social call." "Someone's asking questions about Richard's death," the detective said without preamble. "Digging into the old investigation." Elizabeth's hand tightened on her glass of whiskey. "That case was closed 15 years ago. My husband had a heart attack." "A lot of things can look like a heart attack, Mrs. Grant. You paid me good money to make sure nobody looked too closely back then. Are you threatening me?" "Warning you, this investigator. He's working for Marcus Moore and he's getting close to the truth." After hanging up, Elizabeth poured herself another drink. She'd buried the truth about Richard's death to protect Alexander, but now that very secret might destroy him. Across town in Alexander's penthouse, Serena was cooking dinner. After the chaos at Grant Enterprises, Alexander had insisted she stay with him rather than alone in the apartment. For safety, he'd said, but they both knew there was more to it than that. Something smells amazing, Alexander said, coming in from his home office. Just pasta, Serena replied, but she smiled. These domestic moments felt dangerous, too comfortable, too right. How's damage control going? Gloria's handling the press. The video from Pete's bar changed the narrative completely. Public sympathy is firmly on our side now. And your mother? I saw her face when she left. Alexander sighed. She'll come around, or she won't. I'm done letting her control my life. As they sat down to eat, Serena noticed Alexander seemed distracted. What is it? What aren't you telling me? Just thinking about my father. He pushed his food around his plate. He died 15 years ago, heart attack. I'm so sorry. The thing is, Alexander set down his fork. I never believed it was just a heart attack. He'd been investigating something, some kind of financial irregularity in the company. The night he died, he called me, said he needed to tell me something important. But when I got to his office, Serena reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to talk about it. I want to. I've never told anyone this. He squeezed her hand. He was already gone when I arrived. The police said he'd been dead for hours, but I know I talked to him that night. And his files, the ones he'd been working on, they were all gone. Did you tell the police? My mother convinced me I was confused, grief-stricken. Maybe she was right, but sometimes I wonder. Suddenly, Alexander's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number containing a single photo, Richard Grant's autopsy report, with certain toxicology results highlighted. Alexander, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet. Before he could answer, the elevator dinged. Elizabeth Grant stepped out, looking more disheveled than Serena had ever seen her. Mother, what are you doing here? We need to talk. Elizabeth's eyes darted to Serena. Alone. Anything you have to say, Alexander began, but Elizabeth cut him off. It's about your father, and it's time you knew the truth. Serena stood. I'll give you privacy. No. Alexander grabbed her hand. Stay, please. Elizabeth sank into a chair, looking suddenly old. Richard wasn't just investigating financial irregularities. He'd discovered that someone was using Grant Enterprises to launder money for the mob. When he threatened to go public, they killed him. Alexander finished, his voice hollow. No. Elizabeth took a shaky breath. I did. The silence that followed was deafening. Serena felt Alexander's hand tighten painfully around hers. What are you saying? He whispered. I didn't mean to. We argued. He was going to destroy everything we'd built, expose the company's connections. In the heat of the moment, I put his heart medication in his drink too much. I told myself he gave me no choice. You murdered my father. Alexander's voice was eerily calm. And covered it up. To protect you, Elizabeth cried. If the truth came out, if people knew about the mob connections, they would have killed you too. Why tell me now? Because Marcus Moore's investigator found the proof. He's going to expose everything. Richard's murder, the money laundering, all of it. Unless what? Unless you give him what he wants. Sign over control of your shares in Grant Enterprises, and he'll bury the evidence. Alexander laughed bitterly. Blackmail. That's what this is about. Money. It's about survival, Elizabeth snapped. Everything your father and I built was built on blood money. Alexander stood so abruptly, his chair crashed over. Get out. Alexander, please. Get out. After Elizabeth left, Alexander stood at the window, his body rigid with fury. Serena approached him cautiously. Alexander. He turned, and the raw pain in his eyes broke her heart. Without thinking, she wrapped her arms around him. For a moment he remained stiff, but then he crumpled, holding her like she was the only solid thing in his world. I'm here, she whispered. I'm right here. They stood like that for a long time. While outside their sanctuary, Marcus Moore received a phone call from his investigator. Everything's in place, the investigator said. The evidence about Richard Grant's murder, the mob connections. It's all ready to go public. Marcus smiled. Good, but hold off for now. Let them stew in it. Tomorrow, we move to phase 2. The piano player? Yeah. Time to remind my wife of what happens to people who try to leave me. In the penthouse, Alexander finally pulled back from Serena's embrace. I'm sorry you got dragged into all this. Don't apologize. We're in this together now. He touched her cheek gently. Why? Why do you stay when all I've brought you is more trouble? Because you gave me back my music, my strength, my... She hesitated, then whispered, my heart. Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. Slowly, inevitably, they drew closer until their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home. But even as they found solace in each other, dark forces were gathering. Marcus's revenge was just beginning, and the secrets of the Grant family were about to shake their world to its foundations. Pete's bar was quiet when Marcus walked in, just before closing. The old bartender watched him warily, hand moving under the counter where he kept a baseball bat. We're closed, Pete said firmly. Just came to talk. Marcus pulled out an envelope. About Serena's upcoming performance. Pete froze. What performance? Oh, you haven't heard. Marcus's smile was cold. She's playing at the Gateway Theater next week. Her big comeback. He slid a flyer across the bar. Seems her new boyfriend pulled some strings. The flyer showed Serena seated at a grand piano, looking elegant and confident. An evening of classical piano, featuring Serena Moore, was printed in elegant script. What's your point? Pete asked. My point is, it would be a shame if something happened to those talented hands of hers. Again, Marcus stood. Just make sure Alexander Grant gets the message. She belongs to me. Across town, in Alexander's penthouse, Serena was practicing on the baby grand piano he'd had delivered that morning. The piece she was working on, the one she'd never finished before Marcus broke her hand, was finally taking shape. Alexander watched from the doorway, mesmerized. In the week since their first kiss, since the revelation about his father's death, they'd grown closer than ever, but they'd also been careful, aware of the complications their relationship posed. That was beautiful, he said when she finished. Serena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm terrified about next week. What if I freeze? What if I'm not ready? Hey, he sat beside her on the bench. You're more than ready. This is your chance to reclaim your dream. Our lawyers say Marcus is fighting the divorce harder than ever, after what your mother revealed. Let him fight. The truth about my father changes nothing. We'll face whatever comes together. She turned to face him. Alexander, if the mob connections come out, you could lose everything. The only thing I can't lose is you. He touched her cheek. I love you, Serena. So I know it's complicated. I know the timing is terrible, but she silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her feelings into it. When they finally parted, she whispered, I love you too. The moment was interrupted by Alexander's phone. It was Pete. Marcus was just here, the bartender said without preamble, making threats about Serena's concert. Alexander's jaw tightened. What kind of threats? The kind that end with broken hands. After hanging up, Alexander called his head of security, doubling the protection around Serena, but he didn't tell her about Marcus's threat. She had enough to worry about with the upcoming performance. The next morning, Gloria arrived with news. Marcus filed a new motion. He's claiming temporary insanity due to alcohol addiction at the time of the abuse. If it works, the restraining order could be lifted. He's not insane, Serena said firmly. He's calculating. Every bruise, every broken bone, he knew exactly what he was doing. We'll fight it, Alexander assured her. But there's something else you should know. The media got hold of the story about my father's death. It's going to break tomorrow. Serena grabbed his hand. What are you going to do? The only thing I can do. Tell the truth. All of it. The mob connections. My mother's confession. Everything. The company can burn. His voice was hard. I won't let them use my father's death to control us. Later that day, Elizabeth appeared at Grant Enterprises looking haunted. You can't go public, she pleaded. These people, the ones Richard was investigating, they're still out there, still powerful. Then let them come after me, Alexander said. I'm done living with lies. You don't understand. It's not just about you anymore. Elizabeth pulled out her phone, showing him surveillance photos of Serena at her practice sessions, of her and Alexander together. They sent these this morning. If you talk, Alexander's blood ran cold. I'll handle it. How? These people killed your father. No, Mother, you killed my father. They just gave you the excuse. As Elizabeth left, broken, Alexander made a call. Get me everything you can on the Gateway Theater's security system. And find me someone who knows about the mob's operations 15 years ago, someone who can prove what my father found. That night, as Serena practiced, Alexander paced in his office. The pieces were falling into place. Marcus's threats, the mob's warning, his mother's guilt. It was all connected. His phone buzzed, an email from his investigator. The subject line made his heart stop. Richard Grant's missing files found. Before he could open it, Serena screamed from the other room. Alexander ran out to find her staring at her hands in horror. Red welts were appearing on her skin. Someone had coated the piano keys with a caustic substance. "It burns," she whimpered as Alexander rushed her to the sink, running cool water over her hands. On the piano, a note was propped against the music stand. "Final warning. Walk away, or next time it won't just be a chemical burn." As Alexander held Serena, watching her hands redden and blister, rage unlike anything he'd ever known coursed through him. They'd tried to take his father's truth from him. Now they were trying to take Serena's music, her dream, her future. It ended tonight. He made one final call. "Pete, remember that favor you said you owed me? I need it now, and bring that baseball bat." The emergency room lights cast harsh shadows as doctors examined Serena's hands. The chemical burns weren't severe enough to cause permanent damage, but the concert would have to be postponed. Alexander paced the waiting room, his face dark with fury. "Mr. Grant," Pete arrived, looking worried. "Got your message. How is she?" "She'll recover, but this ends tonight." Alexander led Pete to a quiet corner. "I need to know everything about Marcus's contacts, who he meets with, where they gather. There's this place called the Red Door, private club downtown. He's been meeting some dangerous-looking guys there. One of them..." Pete hesitated. "What?" "I recognized him from years back. Vincent Calabresi. He used to come to my bar when your father was investigating the mob." Alexander's jaw tightened. "So that's the connection. Marcus isn't just working with a private investigator. He's working with the same people who wanted my father dead. These aren't people you want to mess with, Alex. They messed with Serena. That makes it my fight." Just then, Alexander's phone buzzed. The email about his father's files had attachments, financial records, photographs, names, everything Richard Grant had discovered about the mob's infiltration of his company. "What are you going to do?" Pete asked. "First, I'm going to make copies of these files and send them to every major news outlet with a timer. If anything happens to me or Serena, it all goes public. And then?" Alexander's eyes were cold. "Then I'm going to the Red Door to have a chat with Marcus and his new friends." Back in the treatment room, Serena fought back tears as the doctor wrapped her hands. "Will I be able to play again?" "The burns are superficial," the doctor assured her. "With proper treatment, you should regain full mobility in a few days." Alexander came in just as the doctor left. Seeing Serena's bandaged hands, his expression darkened further. "This isn't your fault," she said softly. "I should have seen it coming. After Pete's warning..." "What warning?" Alexander sighed. "Marcus threatened you at the bar, said something would happen to your hands before the concert. Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could protect you." Serena struggled to sit up. "Alexander, you can't keep things from me. We're supposed to be partners." "You're right. I'm sorry." He sat beside her bed. "There's something else you need to know. Marcus is working with the mob, the same people who wanted my father dead." "Oh God." Serena's face paled. "Alexander, these people are killers." "I know. That's why I'm ending this tonight." She grabbed his arm with bandaged hands. "What are you planning?" "Trust me," he said, kissing her forehead. "Just focus on getting better." But as he turned to leave, Serena called out, "Alexander, promise me you won't do anything stupid." He managed a smile. "Define stupid." Before she could respond, Elizabeth Grant burst into the room. "Thank God you're both here," she said, breathless. "Vincent Calabresi's men, they're on their way. Someone leaked that you found Richard's files." Alexander cursed. "How long?" "Minutes, maybe less. We need to get out of here." "No." Alexander's voice was firm. "I'm done running. Mother, get Serena somewhere safe. I'm going to the Red Door." "It's a trap," Elizabeth protested. "Obviously. But I'm done letting them hurt the people I love." He turned to Serena. "I love you, remember that." Before anyone could stop him, he was gone. The Red Door was housed in an old warehouse by the docks. As Alexander approached, he saw Marcus's car parked outside. Everything in him wanted to burst in, to make Marcus pay for hurting Serena, but his father had taught him to think strategically. He pulled out his phone and pressed send. Instantly, Richard Grant's files began uploading to news servers across the country. Inside, Marcus sat with Vincent Calabresi and his men, celebrating their victory. "The piano bitch won't be playing anything for a while," Marcus laughed. "And once Grant sees what we can do, he'll sign over everything to save her." "You're wrong." They all turned to see Alexander standing in the doorway. Well, Calabresi smiled coldly. "The prodigal son? Come to negotiate? No. Alexander held up his phone. Come to show you what checkmate looks like. He played the video security footage from 15 years ago, showing Calabrese entering Richard Grant's office the night he died. My father wasn't just investigating your money laundering, Alexander said quietly. He was wearing a wire. Everything you said that night, every threat, every admission, it's all in the files I just sent to every major news outlet. Marcus lunged forward, but Calabrese stopped him. You're bluffing, the mob boss said. Check your phone, the story's already breaking. As if on cue, their phones began buzzing with news alerts. Calabrese's face turned ashen as he read the headlines. Kill him, he ordered. But before his men could move, the doors burst open. Pete stood there with his baseball bat, and behind him a full SWAT team. Federal agents, everyone on the ground. In the chaos that followed, Marcus tried to slip away. Alexander caught him near the back door. This is for Serena, he said, and threw a punch that sent Marcus sprawling. Hours later, in a safe house across town, Serena paced anxiously. Elizabeth watched her with growing respect. He'll be okay, the older woman said softly. Alexander is stronger than I ever gave him credit for. He's the strongest man I've ever known, Serena replied, and the kindest. The door opened, and Alexander walked in, looking battered but triumphant. It's over, he said simply. Serena ran to him, careful of her bandaged hands as she hugged him. Calabrese and his men are in custody, he continued, and Marcus, let's just say he won't be fighting the divorce anymore. The company, Elizabeth asked quietly, will need new leadership, someone who'll run it honestly. He looked at his mother, someone who wants to make amends for past mistakes. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. You'd trust me? After everything? Dad would want the company to stay in the family. But no more secrets, no more lies. Serena touched his face gently. What about us? Alexander smiled. Well, once your hands heal, you have a concert to reschedule. And I was thinking, yes, maybe we could add a wedding to the program. 3 weeks after the showdown at the Red Door, Serena sat at the piano in Alexander's penthouse, slowly flexing her healed hands. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the diamond ring on her finger. Take it slow, Alexander said from the doorway. The doctor said not to push too hard. I'm not pushing, I'm preparing. She smiled at him. The concert's in 2 weeks, and now we have a wedding to plan too. He came to sit beside her on the bench. About that, are you sure you want to do both? The concert and the wedding? No one would blame you for wanting to wait. I'm done waiting. Her voice was firm. Marcus took enough of my life. I won't let him take one more day. The divorce had been finalized yesterday. Marcus, facing federal charges for his connection to the mob, had signed the papers without protest. He'd lost everything, including his freedom. Have you seen the morning papers? Alexander asked. Serena nodded. The headlines were everywhere. Grant Enterprises announces new leadership. Elizabeth Grant returns as CEO. The sub-headline read, Company pledges full cooperation with federal investigation into past mob ties. How's your mother handling it? Better than I expected. The board trusts her. She knows the company better than anyone, and she's determined to make things right. The elevator dinged, and Elizabeth herself stepped out, carrying a large box. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said hesitantly. Their relationship was still healing, but Elizabeth had shown genuine remorse for her past actions. I found something in the storage room at the mansion. I thought Serena might want to see it. Inside the box was a wedding dress, elegant, classic, with delicate pearl beading. It was my grandmother's, Elizabeth explained, and mine. I know you'll want to choose your own, but I thought, Serena touched the fabric gently. It's beautiful. Like you said that first day in Alexander's office, you're not after our money. You've proved that 1,000 times over. Elizabeth's eyes were bright with tears. I would be honored if you'd consider wearing it. Alexander watched the two women he loved most in the world share this moment, his heart full. But there was one more surprise he hadn't told either of them about. Actually, he said, there's something else you should see. He led them to his car, refusing to say where they were going. 20 minutes later, they pulled up in front of the Gateway Theater. The concert venue? Serena asked, confused. Not just the concert venue. He helped her out of the car. Come on. Inside, the theater was being transformed. White flowers and twinkling lights decorated the aisles. On stage, a grand piano gleamed under the spotlight. Alexander, Serena breathed. I thought, if you want, you could play your concert first. The piece you've been working on, the one Marcus tried to silence. And then, He gestured to the decorated theater. We could have the wedding right here. Music and love combined in one perfect evening. Tears spilled down Serena's cheeks. It's perfect. Elizabeth squeezed her son's arm. Your father would be so proud of you, of both of you. Just then, Pete walked in, carrying a garment bag. Sorry I'm late, he grinned, but I've got something for the bride. Inside the bag was a hand-stitched veil, decorated with tiny musical notes. My wife was a seamstress, Pete explained. Before she passed, she always said music and love were the same thing. They both heal the soul. Serena hugged him tightly. Thank you for everything. That night at the bar was the best thing that ever happened in my place. Pete winked. Though I'd appreciate it if you two could keep the drama down at the wedding. They all laughed, the sound echoing through the theater like music. Over the next 2 weeks, preparations for both the concert and wedding moved forward. Serena practiced daily, her confidence growing as her hands grew stronger. Alexander divided his time between helping his mother clean up the company and making sure everything was perfect for their special day. The night before the concert wedding, they held the rehearsal. As Serena played through her piece, the one she'd finally finished, titled Safe Harbor, Alexander watched from the front row, remembering that first night at Pete's bar. Penny, for your thoughts? Elizabeth asked, sitting beside him. Just thinking about how close I came to missing this. If I hadn't stopped at Pete's that night. That's the thing about love, his mother said softly. It finds you when you least expect it. Your father taught me that. She paused. I forgot it for a while after he died. Let fear and greed take over. But watching you and Serena, it reminded me of what really matters. On stage, Serena finished her piece with a flourish. The small audience of family and friends burst into applause. Ready for tomorrow? Alexander asked as she joined them. More than ready. She kissed him softly. Though I have to admit I'm a little nervous about playing in my wedding dress. You'll be beautiful, Elizabeth assured her. And if you get nervous, just look at Alexander. The way he looks at you, it's like you're the only person in the world. Later that night in the penthouse, Serena stood at the window looking out over the city. Having second thoughts? Alexander asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Never. She leaned back against him. Just thinking about how far we've come. When Marcus first started changing, I thought I'd lost everything. My music, my dreams, my self-worth. And now, she turned in his arms. Now I know that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you really need. And what's that? The courage to start over, the strength to trust again, and, she smiled, a love worth fighting for. Their kiss was interrupted by Alexander's phone. It was Pete. Just wanted to warn you. The press got wind of tomorrow's double event. Expect a circus. Let them come, Alexander said. We've got nothing to hide anymore. After hanging up, he pulled Serena close again. Tomorrow the whole world gets to see what I've known since that first night. That you're the strongest, most beautiful soul I've ever met. And you're the man who gave me back my music. She touched his cheek. And my heart. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, promising a new day, a new beginning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. The Gateway Theater buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, a mix of New York's elite and ordinary music lovers, drawn by the story that had captured the city's imagination. The talented pianist who had overcome abuse to reclaim her music, and the billionaire who had helped her find her voice again. Backstage, Serena sat at her dressing table, already in her wedding dress. Elizabeth's grandmother's gown fit her perfectly, as if it had been made for this moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her veil. You look beautiful, Elizabeth said, entering with a small blue box. Something borrowed. She opened it to reveal a delicate pearl necklace. I wore these at my wedding, and I thought you might want these too. She held out a pair of diamond earrings. Your wedding earrings? Serena asked softly. No, these were a gift from Richard, Alexander's father, the night Juilliard accepted you. He saw your audition piece in the paper and said, that girl's going to change the world of music someday. He bought these to give you at graduation. Serena's eyes filled with tears. But I never, because you left school to support Marcus. Elizabeth's voice was gentle. Richard kept them, saying someday you'd find your way back to music. He believed in you before any of us knew you. As Elizabeth fastened the earrings, there was a knock at the door. Pete poked his head in. 5 minutes till curtain. And, he grinned, you might want to see this. He led them to a small monitor showing the theater entrance. Police had set up barriers to hold back the crowd, But it wasn't paparazzi or society photographers causing the commotion. Instead, dozens of women held signs reading, "Thank you, Serena," and "Your music gives us courage." "They're from domestic violence shelters across the city," Pete explained. "Your story, it's given a lot of women hope." Serena touched the monitor, her throat tight. "I need to see Alexander." "Bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," Elizabeth teased. "Good thing the concert comes first then." They found Alexander in the wings, handsome in his tuxedo. His breath caught when he saw her. "You're supposed to save that reaction for the wedding part," Serena smiled. "I'll have plenty more reactions then." He took her hands gently. "How do they feel?" She flexed her fingers. "Strong, ready." She looked into his eyes. "I love you. I love you too." He kissed her softly. "Now go show them what real strength looks like." The house lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. Serena walked onto the stage, the spotlight catching the diamonds at her ears, making them sparkle like tears of joy. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The music started softly, hesitantly, like those first frightened days after leaving Marcus, but gradually it built, growing stronger, more confident. The melody spoke of pain and fear, but also of hope and healing. When she reached the part she'd been working on the day Marcus had her hands burned, the notes rang out clear and defiant. In the front row, Alexander watched, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. Beside him, Elizabeth wiped away tears. The final movement began, the part Serena had written after Alexander proposed. It was a love song, but not a simple one. It acknowledged the darkness they'd faced, the complications of their journey. Yet underneath it all ran a theme of joy, of triumph, of two souls finding each other against all odds. As the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, the audience erupted. The standing ovation lasted 10 full minutes. When the applause finally died down, Serena spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Music has always been my voice, my truth. For a long time, someone tried to silence that voice. But love," she looked at Alexander, "real love, gives us the strength to sing again." She gestured to the back of the theater where ushers were opening the doors. The women from the shelters filed in, filling the empty seats that had been reserved for them. "This next part of the evening is a celebration of that love, and I wanted to share it with others who might need reminding that there's light after darkness, music after silence." Alexander joined her on stage as the minister took his place. The same piano that had just carried Serena's music now held their rings. "Before we begin," the minister said, "the groom has something he'd like to share." Alexander took the microphone, his eyes never leaving Serena's. "The night we met, you were afraid to make a sound, afraid to take up space in the world. But your spirit, your music, was too powerful to be silenced. You taught me that real love isn't about rescuing someone. It's about giving them a safe place to rescue themselves." He took her hands. "These hands have known pain, but they've never lost their ability to create beauty, just like your heart never lost its ability to love. I stand here today in awe of your strength, grateful for your love and ready to spend the rest of my life making music with you." Tears streamed down Serena's face as she responded, "When I was lost in darkness, you didn't try to drag me into the light. You just stood beside me, holding my hand until I was ready to step into it myself. You gave me back my music, my voice, myself. Today I give you my heart, not because you demanded it, but because you earned it one gentle kindness at a time." As they exchanged rings, the women from the shelters began to hum softly, the melody from Serena's piece about healing. The sound filled the theater like a benediction. "By the power vested in me," the minister said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was accompanied by both applause and music, a perfect harmony of love and art, just as their lives would be. But at the back of the theater, unnoticed by the celebrating crowd, a figure slipped out into the night. In prison, Marcus had found religion, or so he claimed. His parole hearing was coming up, and he had plans of his own for the happy couple. 6 months after the wedding, Serena Grant sat in the visitor's room of Riverside Correctional Facility. Her hands, once broken by the man sitting across from her, now moved confidently as she pushed a document across the table. "What's this?" Marcus asked, his prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to his formerly polished appearance. "Permission to use your story, our story, in my outreach program for domestic violence survivors." Serena's voice was calm, strong. "I'm opening a music therapy center for abuse survivors. Your signature acknowledges your crimes and releases your rights to the story." Marcus leaned back, And why would I do that? Because you've been telling everyone how prison changed you, how you found God. Well, here's your chance to prove it, to help make amends for what you did. You seem different, he observed. Stronger. I always was strong. I just forgot for a while. She stood. Sign or don't sign. Either way, I'm done letting you have any power over my life. As she turned to leave, Marcus called out, I am sorry, for everything. Serena paused at the door. I know. That's why I'm giving you this chance to do something good. Don't waste it. Outside, Alexander waited by the car. You okay? She showed him Marcus's signature on the document. Better than okay. Free. They drove to the construction site of the Serena Grant Music Therapy Center. The building, once a rundown warehouse, was being transformed into a state-of-the-art facility, with practice rooms, performance spaces, and counseling offices. Elizabeth was there, reviewing plans with the contractors. Since taking back control of Grant Enterprises, she dedicated a significant portion of the company's charitable foundation to supporting domestic violence survivors. How did it go? She asked, hugging Serena. He signed, though I think he was more surprised that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Why would you be? Pete called out, approaching with coffee for everyone. The old bartender had become the center's head of security. You've got an army behind you now. Inside the building, workers were installing a wall of photographs, images of women who had escaped abuse and rebuilt their lives. In the center was a picture from Serena's wedding day, her hands on the piano keys, her face radiant with joy. The first group starts next week, Serena said, reviewing her schedule. 10 women, all starting over, just like I did. Speaking of new beginnings, Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his hands on her slightly rounded belly. Should we tell them? Elizabeth's eyes widened. Are you? Serena nodded, glowing. 3 months. We wanted to wait until after the first trimester to announce it. A baby, Pete exclaimed. Well, this calls for a celebration. Non-alcoholic, of course, he added with a wink. Later that evening at their penthouse, Serena played the piano while Alexander listened from his favorite spot by the window. The piece was new, a lullaby for their unborn child. I've been thinking about names, she said, still playing softly. Oh, if it's a girl, how about Hope? Alexander smiled. And if it's a boy? Richard. She met his eyes. After a man who believed in my music before he ever met me. Alexander came to sit beside her, his hand joining hers on the keys. Together they played the simple melody of the lullaby. You know, he said, when I walked into Pete's bar that night, I thought I had everything figured out. Success, wealth, status. I thought that was all that mattered. And now I know that the greatest wealth is having someone to share your music with, someone who sees all of you, the darkness and the light, and loves you anyway. Serena leaned her head on his shoulder. We should invite Pete's Thursday night regulars to the center's opening. After all, they witnessed the beginning of our story. Speaking of witnesses, Alexander nodded toward the door, where Elizabeth stood with tears in her eyes. Sorry, she said. I just came to drop off these. She held out a small box containing tiny gold baby shoes. They were Alexander's. I thought, well, every Grant baby has worn them. Serena took the box, touched by the gesture. They're perfect. As Elizabeth left, Serena turned back to the piano. The lullaby transformed into the piece she'd played at their wedding. Safe harbor, but with a new counter-melody weaving through it. What's that new part? Alexander asked. The sound of family, she replied. Of healing, of love that transforms instead of destroys. Her fingers danced across the keys. The sound of forever. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside, the music played on. A symphony of second chances and new beginnings, of broken things made beautiful, of love that builds instead of breaks. And in the quiet moments between notes, a baby's heart beat in time with the music, promising that the best movements of their story were still to come. The end.